Welcome back, everybody, to yet another episode of the ElfQuest Show podcast. This is episode 48, but we're back to talk again about Stargazer's Hunt Volume 2. I recently did an episode with my friend Tanya, and we kind of talked about everything to do with the issue, but I thought to myself, Stargazer's Hunt really is a trade paperback. It's a collection, it's a graphic novel, if you will, that collects what would have been issues 4 through 8 of the series. And so normally I would do an entire episode on each one of those issues. So I thought, you know what, let's do a second episode and bring on another one of my friends, another fellow ElfQuest fan, and we can have maybe a different conversation, cover some different things. So I'm really excited to welcome back Michael McAdam. I'm gonna bring him out of the waiting room here, so bear with me for a second. And here he is, excellent. All right, technology did not fail us. Hey, Michael, how's it going?
Good to see you, David. It is going great. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I'm super glad that you could join me today because we had such a good time the last time I had you on as a guest host, which I think was for maybe issue 3 of Stargazer's Hunt. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But it was a while ago. And so
Yeah.
we had a great chat, and I always love what you have to say and all of your thoughts and everything that you share on social media and the ElfQuest fan group on Facebook and everywhere else. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about Stargazer's Hunt, and I really want to dive into the Cutter and Skywise relationship and how that all kind of works itself out, right? Because that's really the big thing about what this is all about. But of course, I want to hear your reactions to everything else too. So before we do that, just why don't you introduce yourself to everybody and let them know about Two Gargoyles and what you do.
My name is Michael McAdam. I am a writer, author, actor, virally famous flight attendant, stand-up comedian, voiceover artist. Yes, I like to do a lot of things. I have a small company called Two Gargoyles Comics. You can read all my stuff at twogargs.com. I have been an ElfQuest fan since I was 14 years old. It is my first, best, most primary fandom, and continues to be to this day.
Excellent. Well, you know, since you are yourself a comics professional, did Wendy have any influence on you in terms of art style? Did ElfQuest, you know, as a comics company, work graphics? Like, you know, did you have any guidance from afar from Wendy and Richard in that way?
Because ElfQuest is so central to my journey, my creative journey, and just full disclosure, I can't draw, I write.
Okay, that's right.
There's absolutely no question in my mind that the influence has been there, whether subtle or overt, especially when I write relationships, when I write emotion, when I write people. There is no doubt in my mind that the relationships of these characters in this book was seminal for me, in kind of written in stone, that people are complex and people have depth, which is why, actually, ironically, the Cutter and Skywise relationship is one of the primary relationships in comics to me. I mean, all comics.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. So, well, what's your first like top level reaction? Like, what did you do when you finished reading Stargazer's Hunt Volume 2?
Okay, have you ever been so hungry that you've gone past hungry and you forget that you're hungry until someone puts a meal in front of you, and then you're starving, but you're about to eat? So it is the best meal you've ever had. It is, you know, it is very satisfying. It is very fulfilling. And at the end of it, you are, you know, you are wasted. You are exhausted. You are, you know, because you've just finally caught up with yourself. You've finally fed your body. In this case, it was very much like Stargazer's Hunt was the meal I didn't know I was waiting for. And then when I consumed it, when I devoured it, it filled me up and left me breathless and just sort of like limply lying in my recliner.
I think that if that's what it did to you, I'm pretty sure Wendy and Richard will feel very proud about that, because you know, that's
they should. This, wow, so many notes. This hits so many notes.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you. Like, what do you want to talk about? Like, what were some of the things that really stood out in the book, you know, coming after volume 1, the first 4 issues, and also coming after the final quest.
You know, and I don't want to, you know, pick favorite scenes or whatever, but I absolutely have a favorite scene. I bookmarked it actually, and it is the scene in the Father Tree when Skywise is going for his healing, for his resolution, because the creative team, Wendy, Richard, Sonny, they brought us in. They allowed us to go with Skywise into the Father Tree, which felt almost like going back into the womb in a lot of ways, you know, like surrounding yourself with a blanket, only in this case, it's a living tree with a living spirit. And it devastated me in all the perfect ways, because it allowed us to finally see Skywise's pain released in the most amazing way. And so that scene to me, that it just arrested me. I was reading the book, I was going along, I had a rhythm, and I stopped. And I will admit, I had to have a good cry. I was like, you know, I was sitting there going, thank God, thank God, thank God, you know, because I did not want Skywise to suffer. I did not want him to not have memories, but I knew for him to get them back, he would have to go through this pain, this reconciliation of truth. And to see it happen, and to see Cutter return, even in the spirit world, the way that the Wendy and Richard described the spirit world of the elves, it just, there's no more why. That explained it all to me. That released everything. It's like, there is no more why. And suddenly Skywise was okay, Cutter was okay, I was okay. That scene to me is in many ways the entire point of this graphic novel.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a wrap. That's everything.
Tune in again next time.
Yeah, I mean, you said all of that so perfectly, and that's exactly how I feel as well. The whole point here, I feel, is like, you know, Skywise, as Strongbow said at the very beginning of this series, the problem was that he was so guarded, and everything was sort of, you know, always so much on his terms, you know, including his relationship with Cutter, that he didn't actually let his broken heart happen, right? He kind of like seized up on it. He never really understood Cutter's decisions at the end of the final quest, or the relationship between Cutter and Tamaine. And then Cutter died suddenly, and yeah, he cried, but it wasn't like, he didn't fully go through that grief process. And what you just described, that scene in the Father Tree, you know, after he gets the memories back and he finally kind of addresses it, it is super powerful.
And how interesting which character it was that told him that he was being guarded and being to my way or the highway. Strongbow.
Yeah.
Like, somebody went on a learning journey of his own. Absolutely. I loved that. That was a nice touch.
Yeah,
Very
you
nice.
know, we haven't really talked much about Strongbow in the final, or in Stargazer's Hunt. You know, he factored in the, you know, the first issue or two, and he kind of reappears again at the end. And he's kind of, yeah, like, Strongbow himself as a character has greatly advanced and developed into kind of a whole new person, right? He's sort of this sort of wise hermit of the forest now. Yes. on the World of Two Moons, and, you know, or I'm sorry, on the Star Home. And so his wardrobe reflects that, because clearly he's no Moonshade in the tanning department, because he's literally kind of wearing rags, which I know is a look. And, you know, it's kind of nice to get a little bit of, you know, bare flesh shown there, for those of us who want to ogle. But yeah, Strongbow's really different, and he speaks now. I don't know if you picked up on that.
I sure did. And I also enjoyed that he and Moonshade have basically come around in a circle and are friends again. Yeah. I think he says something like, oh, we dance together on occasion, you know, and it's like, it's like a couple that was married forever, got divorced, went through the pain, and are now friends again. And I can totally empathize with that. And it's basically a minor echo of Skywise's journey, because it's a healing journey of something that was lost.
Right.
But he got there, he and Moonshade got there. So of course he's going to advise Skywise and go, you know what your problem is, kid? Let me tell you, and it was very much like that.
That is exactly what it was like. Although I don't think I could ever hear Strongbow with that Brooklyn accent, but that's funny. So I want to come back to Cutter and Skywise,
Yes.
but so much else kind of happened here. So let's talk about Jink.
Oh yes.
So tell me what you think about Jink and her sort of journey in this.
I was worried at first because of her ability to travel so quickly and also her teleportation ability. I was like, is she going to spend any time in any one spot learning anything? But of course she was. In fact, she surprised me with her maturity. Because I mean, she really does grow up in the blink of an eye in this whole story arc. So I'm like, did you learn anything from that? Did you, are you wanting to heal your dad because you feel guilty or because it's the right thing? Like what's going on? But her travels, and I think this is universally true. Travel broadens, travel begets wisdom, and seeing other cultures, other peoples inspired and helped her to deal with what she was going through.
Yeah, I'm just writing that down because I really like that. I want to remember that.
Okay.
Travel begets wisdom, and it really does apply to Jink, right? I mean, she grew
Absolutely.
up. They make it a point to say, she grew up in essentially paradise, right?
Yes.
Never knowing, want or need, and that might not always be a good thing, right? But Jink, that's the star home, right? And she took her time and waited until she became more mature and developed her skills, and trained with Saba and Orek and Timane, right, on how to kind of hone those skills and essentially learn how to pilot a pod through space, which is something I want to note too, because the idea, the end of the final quest, like a big crux of it was the separation, right? Where it was, and that was so heartbreaking. I mean, that to me, like when Suntop or Sunstream and Ember said goodbye to each other, I was just like a bawling mess in that scene, right? And I've seen comments about well, if they can just come back to the world of Two Moons, doesn't that sort of weaken that? And here's the thing, is that they can't just come back to the world of Two Moons for a variety of reasons. Number one, not the least important, is that not every elf can pilot a pod, right? Like it's a very specialized skill that requires training. Jink can do it, Skywise can do it, Sunstream can do it.
And they've set this level of expertise up all throughout the quest with Egg, with Door, with the Scroll of Colors. There are elves that can and elves that can't, and each to their own talents, of course. Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
But that speaks to what you're saying.
So yes, there is the ability to travel back and forth if the skill is there. And then the other thing that is critical here is if there's a desire to, and once, I think this is the hard part for us mortals to wrap our minds around, right? But you got to ask yourself the question, what would it be like if you got to move on from this world, this life, with all of its pains and pleasures and joys, and you got to move on to the quote unquote better place, right? To the paradise. And I think, and again, Wendy in particular has talked a lot about the hum, and that the elves have this higher hum, and the star home is attuned to that. It's kind of elevating yourself to your highest way of being. When you get the opportunity to do that, and you have left and you've had your closure, it makes perfect sense to me that most of the elves are never going to go back to the world of Two Moons. Sunstream didn't even go back when Cutter died. And so anyway, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, because
well, they bring that up in the book in a very interesting way. The elves, and I think they always have been, with the exception of Cutter, confused about time. It kind of, it glosses over them. Have I been gone for a day or 100 years? I'm not sure. And they specifically state that here. So sure, they could come back to the world of Two Moons if they thought of it.
Right.
But elves have an insouciance that is partly their spiritual elevation, partly their innocence, in that sense. Like, they don't cling to things the way humans do. That's, to me, one of the big differences in ElfQuest humans and ElfQuest elves is clinging, needing, possessing, controlling. Elves don't really have that. I mean, when they have had it, like in Rayek's case, it doesn't go well. It's kind of the antithesis of what your hum is supposed to be.
Right.
So you're working against yourself.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into another whole like thing that happened in Stargazer Volume 2 is the introduction of Queen Bee, Shuna's descendant, who is the head, councilwoman for I forget the exact term, but like the Federated Insect Tribes or something like that.
Oh, I have a theory about who she is.
Oh, okay. Well, and also the reintroduction of good old Par Tolfson.
Yes.
Who, I don't know if you remember him, but he was a character that was introduced in the sort of the 90s era ElfQuest. And he showed up in a little side story that appeared in the anthology ElfQuest comic. So back in the late 90s, when there was ElfQuest Volume 2, it was referred to as, where it was an anthology. Every issue had several different stories in it, some of which were ongoing. So Dreamtime and Wolfrider and a few others. The Wild Hunt, Ember's Tale was all told in that anthology comic. But every once in a while, there would be like one-off stories. And there was I think it was actually a two-part story that introduced this guy, Par Tolfson. Oh. And he was essentially set up as kind of like an Indiana Jones type. He was kind of an archaeologist with a burning desire and curiosity. And he was on this mission to like discover or prove that elves exist, that the world of two moons was a visited world. And so you have to dig that out. It's not been collected in any of the Dark Horse books because it's a very, very side story, but it is online in the ElfQuest anthology series on the ElfQuest website and the free comics reader. When we're done here, I'll find the link to the first page of that and I will share it with you. And I'll also post it in the audio podcast version description. And I'll also put it down below for folks that are watching this on YouTube. But you should definitely read that because Par Tolfson was introduced back then. And now he gets woven into the bigger, sort of canon of ElfQuest in Stargazer's Hunt. And so, but the whole reason I segued to that was, you saying about the human need to sort of like possess, to control, to name, to own, right?
Yes.
And that's something very different than the elves. And that's exactly what Queen Bee, Zazapet, Ikopek, right? Which is Bee, Shuna's husband. That was his actual name. Bee was sort of his insect nickname. So so she's their descendant, and she says to Par after the whole encounter with Jink, which was just fun and great when we kind of got a glimpse into what the future quest story Jink was like. And Par, after, she shoots him because he was going too far, and they're having that conversation, and he's like, but what was it? Was it an elf? And she was like, the spirits go, they're everywhere. Don't get so hung up on naming them. And it just, when you said that, made me think of that, because it's a perfect illustration of what you're talking about how us humans, are like, we have to name everything and catalog it. And it's kind of a way of owning it and controlling it. And the elfin way is just so much freer and more fluid than that, I guess. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, exactly. Elves, like, I have always struggled to think like an elf because they're awesome. But, I am a human being. And so, it is really, really hard to let go of things that you love, right? Because I just think we're just wired that if you love it, you must possess it, and it's like, it's very elevated thinking to be like, no, I can let this go because I love it, that kind of thing. So when you see the elves literally doing that, and I'm still not over Chemo, he just let his body go. He was okay with it. I'm not okay with it, Chemo. Still not okay. But what a great lesson. And what a great observation. And not just in fiction, not just as a reader, but as a person. reading this going, you know what? I could stand to be a little more elf-like. It's philosophy as much as it is fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a big draw for a lot of ElfQuest fans, whether we articulate it to ourselves or not. I mean, I get a lot out of on that level, on that sort of philosophical, but also kind of spiritual
Yeah.
level of from
100%.
having, yeah, like, you know, I grew up, you know, in a fairly religious family, and you know, I went to, you know, religious school my entire life and all of that stuff. And, you know, it never really spoke to me. And in fact, Wendy actually talks about that in the, I think it's the afterword, in Stargazer Hunt Volume 2. So folks, if you've only read the comic, there's a lot of other stuff at the beginning and the end, an introduction. Sonny has written something, Richard has written something. So everybody out there definitely read that. But Wendy actually talks about her own journey with religion and how like none of it ever stuck. But
Right.
for me, I found ElfQuest at a fairly young age, and it did speak to me in the ways that made sense to me and to my spirit and my mind. And you know,
Absolutely.
I don't want to be like kind of hokey or whatever, and like be like ElfQuest is my religion, you know, but like I think that that's not actually too far off the mark. I mean, it's a creative work that tells us something about the real world in our lives, you know, through
Yeah.
this artistic endeavor. And, you know, I mean, I think you could say that about a lot of the, you know, the real world religious texts and that kind of thing. And so, you know, who knows, maybe in 1,000 years, there'll be a formal religion based on ElfQuest. I don't know.
I actually wrote a piece a few years ago, just because I just wanted to write about this, about Cutter as the young god of pagan mythology. And you know, ElfQuest, you can view a lot of mythology, a lot of religion, a lot of spirituality through the lens of ElfQuest. You can use the characters to help you understand symbols and iconic people in mythology and whatnot. And you can put names and faces from ElfQuest onto those people and realize this fulfills this position in my worldview. You know, I've always enjoyed playing with that, going, you know, like I don't know, what if Picknose were secretly Buddha? Like, you know, but just the idea of seeing the world through the lens of ElfQuest and realizing that, wait a minute, this fits in a lot of ways.
Very much so. And I totally credit ElfQuest with a lot of my, you know, my own sort of growth and maturity, you know, going from a kid into an adult, and the way that I view and importantly respond to the world.
Yes.
And I'm trying to remember, I recently did, I was doing an interview for my National Wildlife Federation, you know, my other world, my conservationist world, and,
Yes.
you know, kind of media personality spokesperson work that I do. And I remember there was a question about kind of this, like, you know, what kind of influenced, you know, your worldview, or like what's some wisdom. It wasn't asking like what the influence was, but it was like what's some wisdom you learned. And I can't remember my exact response, but I remember when I was responding, thinking like, this is like right out of ElfQuest.
Yeah.
You know, it was something
Yeah.
like, you know, treat each other as best we can, which, you know, is what Wendy and Richard always say. Like that's sort of like where the elves are operating from, you know,
Yes.
at least most of them, not Winnowell, obviously. But anyway, so yes, ElfQuest has all of that. And it definitely has been a big influence, I think, on a lot of us in that way.
Yes.
Okay, so anything else do you have anything you wanted to add about Queen Bee and the insect tribes, or this sort of mission of Par Tolson?
To me, Queen Bee answers the question, what happened to Shen Shen? I don't think she's a descendant at all. I think it's Shen Shen.
You think it's Shen Shen?
I absolutely 100% think it's Shen Shen.
Hmm.
Because shining where she loves, of course she's protecting the elves in the way that she can, because she wants to live with the humans. But now, and I mean, what was Shen Shen in the Sun Village way, way back when? She was the queen bee, honey.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Of course, I have nothing to back this up or substantiate it. It's just a fun thought exercise.
Totally, but this is what like the internet fan theory world is all about, right? It's like, oh my gosh. So yeah, I'm gonna have to like stew on that and do what you were saying, like checking all the boxes mentally. But there's a lot. I don't know. That's a pretty good theory. I mean, you
I
could
want to
even
circle
say,
back. I want to circle back to Cutter and Skywise for a second here.
yeah, yeah,
We were talking about influences and we're talking about worldview and whatnot, and their relationship. My first visual acquaintance with ElfQuest was the old Starblaze Volume 2. So it was Cutter and Skywise the
me
whole
too, by the
time.
way.
Oh, okay, there we go. And that relationship, it never occurred to me that it was anything other than everything. You could tell they did not define anything. It simply was. They were as close could be. Never once did I think, oh, these guys are good buds. These guys are good friends. No, they are Cutter and Skywise. You know, like, I mean, they are themselves. Later on, as we approached the idea of sexuality and the elves and whatnot, it's funny that even though I would be rooting for, shipping those two together, it never occurred to me to, because it didn't need to, because it was what it was all along.
Yes.
And when you see Cutter and Skywise go out in the spirit world, when they're in the father tree there, the colors that are chosen. Skywise is the moon, is cool, is bluish. Cutter is the sun, is gold, is light. They complement, they fit together. And when Skywise goes out for the first time, he's gone out of his body for the first time, he's like, wow, it is completely natural to him because it's with Cutter. And they laugh because they're together. And where does Skywise go to heal? In Cutter's embrace, in the embrace of the tree which holds his spirit. And then what does Cutter do? Oh my gosh, when that lodestone gets pushed up through the wood, I had to put the book down, I had to get tissues. Oh my goodness. And then when Skywise gives it back to him, saying, no, I gave it to you. You keep it. It wasn't even just about the healing anymore. It was about this relationship, much like the spirit of an elf, is eternal.
Yep.
And I love that they gave it to us. Like Wendy and Richard gave it to us in the book, not finished, never finished. Oh man, you could not have satisfied me as a reader, as a fan, as a lover of Cutter and Skywise any more than going, it may be over, but it's not finished. I'm like, thank you. And Wendy said this to me at San Diego Comic-Con like over a decade ago. She said, oh, the quest never ends. It's never over. And at first I thought, well, yes, that's your tagline. But then she goes, no. And she gave me that look, I'm holding you with my eyes,
well,
right?
Cutter. Wendy is Cutter, right? So
yeah, right.
Fair. Yes.
The quest is never over. And I said, thank you, because that's all I ever needed to hear, ever. So knowing that Cutter and Skywise are always going to be Cutter and Skywise, no matter what shape, what form, what time, satisfies me in ways I cannot even express.
You just said that so perfectly. I have nothing to add, but very eloquently said. And I appreciate that, because again, a lot of this is hard to grok from our human brains, right? And our human cultures, right? Like there's still a lot of confusion over the nature of Cutter and Skywise relationships among a lot of fans who are like, well, like Cutter married Lita. So, like you have to break all of those labels and all of those kind of ownership things that we put on each other. Like, yes,
exactly.
do life mates exist? And is there a title for that?
Boxes.
Sure, but like these are people that transcend all of that. Yes, that exists in their life, but that doesn't mean that Cutter and Skywise don't have, just as much of a relationship, right? And the baby making part of it, which is what recognition is mostly about. Like, yes, you do need kind of different parts in order to do that, but that's neither here nor there in terms of Cutter and Skywise's relationship. And I was so like, my heart felt hugged by seeing it's two things: seeing Cutter and Skywise in each other's embrace
Yes.
in the book, right there.
Oh,
right?
that piece of art where they've had their shirts off and they're just sitting there and they're just casually just being together.
Yes.
Hey, a print of that would be awesome. Oh, sorry, was that out loud? I'm sorry.
No. Well, you never know what little elf ears are listening to those
Right.
kinds of things. So, but yeah, that just getting to see it visually, what we've been told all along, and seeing it right there, like there is no question. And even if there was, literally in the text, they refer to each other as friend of my body and spirit, right?
Yes,
So
which is the same way you would refer to a life mate.
right. These are not just bros, right?
Right.
And I know a lot of people maybe or some fans might not like that, but you know what? Like that's the world, and I don't know what else to say about that.
I was one of the readers that was okay with Cutter's death because it was perfect, because it did feel like a loop had been closed and it was tidy. What I didn't realize is what I needed to hear that they put in this book. I had let Cutter go, assuming I will never see him again. And I had grieved, but I was okay. I was going to move on. What a reward for Cutter to come back and say, oh yeah, I'm gone, but it's not forever. And also, like, it never ends. Like I rest within you. Well, he was talking directly to me, just so you all know. He was talking specifically to me. I loved that phrase. I promised I wouldn't cry on this podcast.
I promised it wouldn't be a good podcast unless I made you cry. So.
But no, that reward, and I think that reward, we all get it. We're like, we have let go of Cutter's body, but Cutter's spirit's still there for us and it rests within us. So he's never gone. And I love that it was made blatant. I love that it was like specifically stated. And I don't know any fan that couldn't be satisfied with that. I'm sure there are some, but I don't know any.
Right. Exactly. And, going back to the conversation we just had about, kind of applying ElfQuest to like the real world. I mean, what a beautiful way to think about our loved ones who are gone. Right.
Yes.
And, that's the kind of philosophy that borders on, kind of a spiritual belief that you can take from ElfQuest. And,
Yes.
I know that in reading that, and particularly that part that you just said about, Cutter saying, well, I rest in you, is just such a beautiful concept that, our loved ones are always there. And, even though, like Lita points out, like you can't call them, right? In the previous episode, Tanya and I talked a lot about this, about just sort of like how great that is, right? It's not like you can like summon them at will, but like they're there, and sometimes you can just kind of connect with them. But even if that's not happening, like to know that they're still with us here is just a powerful thing. And so I really loved and appreciated that too.
I like to believe that sometime in the future, this story, that particular passage, is going to help somebody deal with their own grief by putting it in perspective. I absolutely believe it can, and it will.
I have no question and no doubt about that either. But there's another panel, and the book does not have page numbers,
No.
So it's a little bit hard, especially for folks that are listening to this, because I'm going to just describe the scene, and you'll have to find it for yourself. But it is at the end of Cutter and Skywise's spirit dance, just before Skywise comes back into his body. So it's that beautiful 2-page spread for viewers. You're not really going to be able to see it, but yeah, Michael has it up there. That's exactly it. So it's the 2-page spread of sort of the cosmos, if you will, and Skywise, wondering like, what is it like to have all of this, right? And the very final bottom of the page there is Cutter and Skywise kind of in, essentially a last spirit embrace, because as soon as you turn the page, Skywise is back in his body. And I like this piece of art is everything.
Yeah.
I don't know if you recognize it. Take another look at it and tell me if it seems familiar to you.
It does seem familiar, but it's so Cutter and Skywise, I actually can't pick out a specific moment.
Okay, so there's actually two moments.
Okay.
So the first, and this was the one that sprung immediately into my mind. There is an old sketch that Wendy did that I believe is in one of the Flesk publication art books. I don't know if it's the Art of ElfQuest or if it's the Line of Beauty, the Art of Wendy Pini. I think it might be the Art of ElfQuest. But there is a panel, and it's this panel.
Yes.
And it's Cutter and Skywise kind of leaning in and kind of embracing, where you feel the palpable love between the two of them. And both male characters, right? And the caption that Wendy wrote underneath this little sketch was, "Don't be afraid to love."
Oh.
Right?
Oh,
and this was
wow.
drawn, I think, in the very early days of ElfQuest, like late 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all of this that we're talking about has always been there, right?
Yes, which is amazing.
And just that whole idea of seeing, I mean, that just to me sums up ElfQuest, right? Like that is what ElfQuest at its core is about. Overcoming fear and loving, right? And so
and all those memories returning to Skywise with all those vintage shots of them from way back in the original quest.
Yes.
All of it coming back, and you realize together, always.
Right.
Oh, yeah. And see, now I have goosebumps. Like, oh my goodness.
I know. I'm starting to well up just saying this, but so as soon as I saw that one piece several years ago, I instantly fell in love with it. And it's just like, it's just everything. And I don't know how better to articulate it. It like speaks to my heart. And so seeing it here, it couldn't have been more perfect to finally have that piece of art worked into an actual ElfQuest comic story, right?
Right.
But there's more.
Oh.
Because, and I will completely own that this is something that I completely missed. And maybe I won't even reveal it. In fact, I'm not going to reveal it.
Oh, great then.
But Wendy herself told me, when we were sitting at AwesomeCon in Washington, D.C., and that's where the book first, the very first physical copies of the books showed up, even before they were available in comic shops. And so,
which was awesome in itself. Yeah.
Oh my God, it was so awesome. And Wendy and Richard, I know, were just super thrilled to have it there, because that was really one of the main reasons for going to that show, was because it was immediately right after the release of the book, and then the book got postponed. So it was a real bummer to not have it. And then Dark Horse pulled some magic and got a box shipped out, overnighted, showed up in the hotel. So we had it for sale there, and a few dozen lucky fans got to buy it. But I'm sitting there and I'm looking at it at the table, and Wendy happens to be right there. So like, of course, like I'm super spoiled. And I was just saying, like, I love that panel, it's so perfect. And I was saying, like, oh, I recognize it. And there is another place where that particular artwork has shown up before in ElfQuest.
Oh.
And I am an obsessive ElfQuest fan, and I usually can know immediately when there's something like that happening, and even I didn't catch on it. So I'm not going to spoil it. I'm just going to tell you and tell everybody out there watching or listening, that's your quest. Find it. Go back into the back ElfQuest catalog, all 45 years of it, and you will find another version of this kind of artwork that's in a really powerful place as well. And so again, to see it echoed here from that scene, as well as that original artwork that immediately sprung to my mind, is just, again, it's everything, right? Like, this is like,
if there is one downside to ElfQuest, it's that it's over 40 years of story and material. And it's not even a downside unless, you know, you're like, oh shoot, where have I seen that before? Oh, let me just stroll back in time 40 years, you know. But believe me, I'm not complaining. I love being spoiled and having so much story to look through. I'm looking forward to this quest you've set us, actually.
Yes, yeah. Well, and you know, to me, that's part of the fun of the fan community, right? Like we get to
Mm,
come together and geek out about ElfQuest and help each other find these Easter eggs and make these connections to what has gone before. You know, whether we're doing it on social media platforms or we're doing it via this podcast, now I guess this video cast. I love it, right? This is like I'm here for it, and I love kind of having a little bit of a mini scroll of colors in my own brain for all that
oh,
has gone before.
absolutely.
But I don't know everything. I don't remember everything. And I oftentimes am reminded of things from other fans, or other fans point things out that I never would have even thought.
Right.
So that's why I love doing this. And I love having these conversations, because I always get not only, you know, new things that I might have missed in the comic, but just insights and perspectives that I otherwise might not have thought about.
And
Um,
it's inspiring too. Like you can go back and read a story you just read after speaking to another fan and go, I did not pick up on this theme. I didn't notice this. Now, how much richer is the story?
right.
No,
Yeah.
and this is a great community to do that in, because people are very happy to talk about it.
Totally. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's what, you know, these books and these comics are, they're sort of the core, right? And Wendy and Richard's creativity and their vision and their craft at storytelling. And shout out to Sonny Strait too, who, you know,
Oh,
did
yes.
a good portion of the art here. You know, he's definitely part of this
Oh,
particular
yes.
tale, and you know, in that storytelling. But then there's this whole other kind of sort of surrounding sphere, which is the community and the fans, and there's this whole other level of creativity and sharing and humming that happens, you
Yes.
know, that's centered around the work. But and that's like, that's a really great thing. It's, you know, I know, you know, all fans don't always agree on everything all of the time, and that's totally fine, right? But ElfQuest fandom on the whole is really great. You know, we've managed to avoid, you know, some of the other fandoms problems with, you know, really aggressive toxicity and infighting and all of that. And you know, knock on wood that remains the case. But I think
I love that we all have tacitly agreed that that has no place here.
yeah,
I love that. I
yeah,
feel safe in this fandom. I feel respected in this fandom. And I love when people bring up their opinions and their, you know, their, you can almost feel sometimes that people feel vulnerable, even just talking about their interpretation of the story, but nobody comes down on you in
yeah,
this fandom. You know, it's
yeah,
like, no, we want to hear, please share,
right.
please share.
Totally.
Yeah.
And everyone's so supportive and uplifting and protective of one another too.
Yes.
You know,
Very.
again, we're not immune to some of that. Like that does happen from time to time in the ElfQuest fan community, and sometimes there's some tough stuff that needs to be chewed on, and you know, perspectives change and whatever. But yeah, I want to give a shout out to all of the ElfQuest fans out there for just being rad and kind of trying to live up to the spirit of what the elves are all about, right? Again, treating each other as best we can, you know, acknowledging that we might not always see eye to eye on everything, but you know, that there's space for all of us. So that seems like a good place for us to wrap. But before we do that, I mean, there's a lot more that happened in here.
Oh
So
yeah.
I wanted to
Wow.
give you an opportunity. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? Or
The fascination of vastness, like that double page spread we just talked about, and the fact that in some respects it does not matter. The elves don't perceive distance the same way they don't perceive time in this story. And I love that they followed Cutter's hum across space itself, which implies that the spirit world has no boundary, has no ending, has no beginning. You could be on another planet, and if you know the hum you're looking for, you can find it no matter where you are. Fascinating, fascinating story. And I have to say, I've always worried that science fiction lacks spirit. I was more of a fantasy kid growing up because that's where magic and spirit seemed to live. And I viewed sci-fi as cold and machine-like. This story has melded these two concepts together, space travel, other planets, aliens, and melded it with fantasy and heart and spirit and soul. And I'm like, I don't know if there's any other story that has ever done this. I've looked. I'm like, is there another ElfQuest out there I might enjoy? No, no, sir, there isn't. So Wendy, Richard, wow, still 40 years of wow. And please keep wowing us, because everything that Warp puts out does wow me, and you have my respect and you inspire every day.
Well, again, brilliantly said. I don't know what else I could say to top that. I think that's a perfect way to end this podcast. So Michael, thank you again for joining us. We totally are going to do this more. There's so much, like you said, next year will be 45 years of ElfQuest. And I feel like we're only scratching the surface on what we can do on this podcast. So, Final Quest has wrapped, or Stargazer's Hunt has wrapped. I don't know that there's another comic on the horizon anytime soon, but if there is, we'll definitely be doing these podcasts. But even if there's not, I think I might want to go back to the beginning and maybe go back to the beginning and kind of have a whole series of podcasts with folks like you and other fans and other people that have been involved, and just have some conversations, because
ElfQuest New Perspectives.
Exactly. Yeah. There's plenty to talk about. So on that note, I'm going to send you on your way. Shade and sweet water, everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And until next time, shade and sweet water.
Shade and sweet water.
Bye, everyone.